Joining us now to talk about all this anyhow is Shane Jones, and I imagine he's had a pretty busy morning this morning. Welcome, Minister. You probably had a fairly busy morning on just this issue, have you, to do with the Napoui issue?
Yeah, it's very topical. And I think people respect the fact that I've been willing to speak out after such a long period of delay and, quite frankly, wastage of money. Now, I inevitably will upset some of the personalities in Taitokero, but I put it to you this way, Michael. At what point are we going to draw a line in the sand and start to focus on the future as opposed to feeding these habits of dysfunctionalism which blight the Ngāpuhi claim?
Well, that's a question you'd have to ask the Maori leaders. I think there's an acceptance within. Well, I had a chat to the Maori Napoui tribal leader last week who suggested that he has some sympathy for that viewpoint. You've got to move on and deal with the reality. Is Peter Tippany not moving on?
Oh, look, Peter and I went to St. Stephen's School together. He's a tad younger than my good self. He's recently stood down as the chair of the Waitangi National Trust. He was a recent recipient of the King's Honour. And often what happens with hapu leadership is they become captured like frogs in the pond and they can't hop out of the pond for fear of being pulled back in. But my approach is completely different to being an iwi or a hapu leader. The Crown, through our bill, either before or after the next election, and I suspect that it'll be after the next election, will have the option of saying, okay, the current process has gone on for 20, 25 years. We're going to hold some money in escrow. We're going to set up an interim administrative body that keeps the capital safe. And you can spend the next 20 or 30 years wasting the dividends from that capital if you want to continually have policy seances about sovereignty. But that's all the taxpayer is going to give you. The taxpayers of New Zealand are moving on. Now, if you choose not to move on yourselves, then that's on you. But there's not another cent that will be spent indulging, encouraging, or underwriting dysfunctionalism.
No, fair enough. Listen, just can you explain to me though? I've always understood Ngāpuhi to be its own iwi, and Ngātahine and those others to be, if you like, sub-tribes or hapu. What's your understanding of the associations?
Yeah, the paramount leader of Ngāpuhi, when I was a lad, regarded as the number one orator, was Sir James Henare,
Hmm.
last commander of the Maori Battalion, the grandfather of the current Maori MP, my putative nephew, Peni Henare. And Ngāti Hine was always described by Sir James Henare as a hapu, as a sub-tribe of the broader Ngāpuhi people. Now, look, nothing is static. Identity and kinship groups change. But there's one thing that New Zealand First is not going to acquiesce with, which is turning Maoridom's largest tribe into confetti, where everyone gets rewarded for their bad behavior and they get a pony. Or more importantly, we end up with these tiny units that are economically unviable, administratively burdened, and the vast majority of the people over the next 20, 30, 40 years are cast to the side whilst a small cultural elite dominate the direction of these Maori and iwi affairs. That's not happening in Ngāpuhi to the extent that New Zealand First is needed to effect the transfer of public capital to settle the claim.
Okay. How much are we talking about here? What potentially we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars?
Well, 150 million has already been allocated into a trust. It's been going for about 5 or 6 years. The idea was floated by Winston Peters. Obviously, Winston felt that the way to get the Ngāpuhi to agree was to have a significant amount of money. After all, they are the original signatories of the treaty. They are the largest tribe, 170 odd thousand New Zealanders of Māori descent, give as their iwi, the Ngāpuhi. But like a lot of other areas, they emptied out in respect of urbanisation. And once the flagpole was cut down in the early 1840s and the seat of government relocated from the Bay of Islands to Auckland, there's always been a certain pall, that's in PALL, that hung over the north. And it's almost as if the hapu leadership today are wanting to celebrate this sense of marginalisation. And it's actually worse than victimhood. It's a mindset that continually demands that the entire country should decolonize so they can catch up with where the hapu leadership are. And the hapu leadership, sadly, have been passed by. Look, bear in mind, mate, this particular process to settle this claim has gone on longer than both Iraq wars, Afghan war, Brexit, and I could continue to name a host of other global events where things got sticky and an inevitable conclusion was visited upon that process. But a tiny group have been enabled to perpetuate in an almost Marxist way the permanent sort of decolonization revolution. Well, if you want to do that in your spare time, get on with it. But New Zealand First is not going to acquiesce with any more taxpayers' money being used to feed that dysfunctionalism.
In my conversation I had a couple of weeks ago with the Napoui leader, Mane Tahiri, he mentioned poor leadership in the past had held Napoui back, and said pretty much what you were saying, that it's time to look to the future and start to plan appropriately for all the issues that are confronting the iwi on a daily basis. And this was in the wake, obviously, of the murder of little Katalia and the Kaikui demonstration. Do you think that the Ngāpuhi leadership are in step with you on this issue?
We've got to go over the top of them, mate. It's inevitable to me. It's evident, shall I say, to me, that the vast majority of the members they want um, uh, they want a reset. They want a circuit breaker. They are heartily sick. I mean, we've already got the Labour Party saying there won't be a settlement before the next election.
Mm.
What I disagree with the Labour Party about is they believe that the sovereignty issue. I'm astounded that a
Yeah.
person wants to be the Prime Minister of New Zealand again
Mm.
is breathing life
Mm.
into this dangerous, shallow, virtue signaling, backward looking thesis that somehow after the treaty there was a residual Maori sovereignty.
Mm.
The fact that the leader of the Labour Party is saying that and he wants it included in Ngāpuhi settlement shows me that they're writing themselves out of the script.
He didn't quite say that. What he said, as I understand it, was they agree to disagree. So they're happy for claimant groups to have that view. It is not the view of the government, Chris Hipkins. But I'm struggling to see how you can reconcile those two views. They are irreconcilable, aren't they?